as you move into all of these states, all of these ecstatic states, you see very clear changes. Activity in the prefrontal cortex quiets down. Neurochemically, stress hormones are flushed out of your system and you're replaced with feel-good performance-enhancing drugs, serotonin, dopamine, anandamide, endorphins, and oxytocin. These are really heavy performance-enhancing chemicals. They do lots of things. They surround the brain's information processing machinery. So we take in more data per second, we process it more completely, process it more quickly, which is, by the way, why these states are so information rich. All of the brain's information software has been jacked up by this neurochemistry.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, where you can find a large selection of Om and yoga clothing, spiritual jewelry, and unique fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now here's your host, Ashton Sabo.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. I am really excited about our show today, but I want to give you the quick reminder to go over to SavannahSpirit.com/contest and enter in the weekly contest. Each and every week you can enter for the chance to win a $100 gift card for the SavannahSpirit.com store. So go over there and check it out. Our show today is an exciting one. It's about the revolution of consciousness that's happening now. It's about flow states, the cross-pollination that we're seeing today through all kinds of different fields, from extreme athletes and yogis and business executives and Navy SEALs and this whole wide range of people and experiences that now are sharing those experiences with one another to really give us an amazing view of consciousness. This is something that personally has been a big part of my own journey in life. I've been so fortunate to have been exposed to so many different spiritual traditions and philosophical ideas and extreme sports and martial arts and science. And it's given me an opportunity to see things from a different perspective. So I'm not so tunnel visioned in any one idea or thought. And it's really allowed me an amazing experience to be able to see these different things from different perspectives. So I'm really, really excited about our show today. Our guest today is Stephen Kotler. He's a New York Times-bestselling author, award-winning journalist, and the co-founder and director of research for the Flow Genome Project. His books include Tomorrowland, Bold, The Rise of Superman, Abundance, A Small Furry Prayer, West of Jesus, The Angle, Quickest for Flight, and his new release, Stealing Fire, How Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and Maverick scientists are revolutionizing the way we work and live. His work has been translated into 40 languages, and his articles have appeared in over 80 publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Atlantic Monthly, Wired, Forbes, and Times. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to be here.
I'm thrilled to have you on the show, not only because your latest book is this wonderful synthesis of so much of the work that you've been doing over the years, but I've read a number of your books before, and they get me excited because when I first read your book, the thought to me was, this guy is a yogi. He might not identify with himself as a yogi. He might not use that term, I'm a yogi. But to me and my understandings of the practice and the wisdom, it was, this guy is speaking like a yogi. You could sit him down in front of a master and they would be talking the same language. But something specifically that you do that I really appreciate it is you take the conversation from metaphorical, mysterious lingo and you bring it to a very grounded, rooted, scientific conversation, which allows more cross-pollination, which I think is really fascinating and it's such a big part of the work that you do. So if you could, give us a little bit of information about your background, your work, and what led you to co-author this book, Stealing Fire.
Those are all, first of all, thank you for that lovely introduction. I, even after 20 years of Ashtanga, have never once identified as yogi. I don't even think I know what the term actually means, but it sounds nice. So thank you very much. Very much appreciated. And you did a pretty good job of my background. I'm trained as a novelist, and I sort of fell into magazine journalism as a sort of a way to pay the bills, and discovered that I loved it, and discovered that I became, there's a term for me, which they call me a big think writer, which sounds a lot fancier than it is. And it just means you work at the intersection of disciplines. So I got a chance to work at the intersection of a lot of really interesting disciplines, which eventually, led me out of basically right into science and neuroscience, psychology, things like this. I was working in the late 90s, and it was there was a revolution going on. So it was amazing. And this, led me into deeper discussions of consciousness, which led me, to the work that you're familiar with.
Now, a lot of your work centers around flow states. And I think just to give our listeners a sense of where to begin, can you define flow or what the flow state is?
Sure, absolutely. The central question of all that work has always been, what does it take to do the impossible? Right? At the heart of every one of my books is a group of people who are taking on impossible challenges and usually pulling them off. Right? As a Superman, it's athletes doing impossible feats. In Bold, it's entrepreneurs building impossible companies in record times, having global impacts. Abundance, it's people taking on grand global challenges like water and poverty and hunger and things that used to be the jobs of governments. And so at the center of all this work over 30 years, one of the things that I've consistently observed is that what all these groups have in common is everybody involved has found a way to alter their consciousness and trigger a state of flow. And flow is roughly now considered the source code of ultimate human performance. It's what it takes to do the impossible. And flow is technically defined as an optimal state of consciousness. It's a state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. And, you may know it by runner's high, being in the zone. If you play basketball, it's being unconscious. If you're a beatnik, jazz musician, it's being in the pocket. Flow is a technical term, and it refers specifically to an experience we've all had, which is those moments of kind of rapt attention and total absorption. We get so focused on the task at hand, everything else disappears. Action and awareness merge. The surfer becomes the wave. The writer becomes the words. That sort of feeling of expansion. And your sense of self disappears. Time passes strangely. Sometimes it'll slow down. You'll get a freeze frame effect. More frequently, it speeds up and 5 hours go by in 5 minutes. And throughout, every aspect of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof.
Now, in your recent book, Stealing Fire, you kind of shift from just talking about flow states and you kind of bring in a new term, ecstasis. And I was wondering if you could talk about that as well, and the three categories and kind of why or how all these categories form together to build the basis for this conversation.
Great question. Great place to start. So it's easier to kind of describe what we saw. At the Flow Genome Project, which is the organization that I co-founded with Jamie Wheel, who I also co-wrote Stealing Fire with, we're a research and training organization. We're the largest open source research project in the world that studies flow states and peak performance states. And on the training side, we work with everybody from kind of Fortune 100 companies to top tech companies to the US Navy SEALs and so forth. And you have to understand that we are going into the heart of American kind of business. And we are training people in the use of an altered state of consciousness, which, even though it's a state of consciousness with 150 years of research behind it and a long track record of ultimate human performance in dozens and dozens of fields, it's still teaching people how to use an altered state of consciousness. And we still thought it was pretty weird, pretty strange that business had sort of shifted enough that we could be doing this. And we'd finish these presentations and people would flock up to us and they'd say, okay, this flow stuff, it's awesome. I'm doing some of it. I didn't know what it was. I want to do more of it. But what do you think of meditation? Or what do you think of tantric sex work? Or whole teams of engineers microdosing with psychedelics to enhance creativity, or Navy SEALs going to 2-week silent meditation retreats, or yoga, or Tony Robbins in really weird places, or even the rise of kind of alternative sexuality as a way to change states. All these things were kind of everywhere we went, and people were asking us questions about them. And we noticed a bunch of things. First of all, in doing the research that became Rise of Superman on flow, Jamie and I had to backtrace all of the neurobiology of flow. So we had to unite all these different groups of people who weren't talking to each other. The neuroelectricity guys didn't really talk to the neural anatomy guys, who didn't really talk to the neurochemistry folks, who didn't really speak to the physiologists, who really knew nothing about the psychologists, and nobody was talking to the editor, or the video game designers, or the athletes, or the artists, and the whole thing was a mess. And so I wanted to kind of unite all the language together, give people, this is the scope of the research, this is the language, this is what we're doing. And in putting that together, we realized we sort of built a Rosetta Stone for all altered states. And what we realized is all the states that people were asking us about shared very similar overlapping neurobiology with flow. This wasn't a new idea. 100 years ago, Harvard psychologist William James, kind of the godfather of American psychology, writes the first textbook on psychology, and then starts studying spiritual experiences, and notices that it doesn't really matter what the doorway is. You can come in through prayer or meditation or chanting or positive thinking or on and on and on. He looks globally at everything that's going on. He says, God, they make you feel the same way. They have the same psychological impacts. They have the same performance benefits across the board. And we forget about this for 100 years. And 100 years later, we notice that James was right. All these things have the same underlying neurobiology. The same knobs and levers in the brain are being tweaked in all these states. So suddenly we realize meditative states, contemplative states, mystical states like speaking in tongues or trance states, out-of-body experiences, flow states, states of awe, and psychedelic states, which are all the categories we sort of look at in Stealing Fire, share a lot of overlap. And we're trying to figure out how the hell do we talk about this thing that is bigger than flow, not quite as big as altered states, which goes from dreaming on one end to schizophrenia on the other, and into this smaller bracket. And when we're working with the Navy SEALs, Rich Devine, commander of SEAL Team 6, uses the Greek term ecstasis. He's describing how all the Navy SEALs need to flip a switch in their brain and get into group flow together. But to use it to describe their experience, he uses the Greek term ecstasis, which is a great term because it's really precise and it's not fruity at all. It literally means ecstasis, to stand outside oneself, which refers to the sense of self getting turned off, right? So the inner critic goes quiet, the self is gone. And then in the Greeks, they were filled with divine inspiration. What we would say is that the self goes away and it's in its place. Intuition, insight, creative decision-making all sort of get cranked up really, to maximum. But that's precisely what happens in all these states. That's all the experience they share. That's what all these peak performing individuals and these peak performing organizations were all seeking. The self to go away and access to this greater information layer. So, not knowing what else to do, we use the term ecstasis.
You talk about it, even just there, about the neurobiology and things like that. And I know that figuring out what's happening behind the scenes, as it were, and the chemistry and the neurobiology and everything else is a big part of your work. Can you explain a little bit more about chemically what's happening in the body, in the brain, in these moments of flow?
Flow, or let's just talk about
ecstasis.
Yeah, let's talk about the larger category of ecstasis, because there are, I can go into the micro differences between all this stuff if you want, because they exist. Meditation is not quite like flow, and Vipassana, open senses meditation, does different things to the brain than focused meditation and blah, blah, blah. We can break that down. But at a really high level, 21st century normal, where you and I are right now, we're having a conversation, we're on Zoom, we can see each other, so everything's fired up, our mirror neurons are firing and blah, blah, blah. Our brains are doing three things. We've got hyperactivity in our prefrontal cortex, right? So this is the part of the brain that is doing long-term planning, complex decision-making, sense of morality, sense of will, right? All that stuff. It's going crazy. It's hyperactive. Brain waves are up around beta. It's a fast-moving wave. It means you're awake, you're thinking, you're processing information. It gets a little faster and you move into anxiety. It gets a little slower down around alpha and you start moving into daydreaming mode. And there's neurochemically, we've got the steady drip, drip, drip of cortisol and norepinephrine. These are stress hormones. We're literally, this is described, by the way, by psychologists as tired, wired, and stressed. But what it really is the signature of somebody on the brink of a fight or flight response. So it's not a particularly healthy signature. As you move into all of these states, all of these ecstatic states, you see very clear changes. Activity in the prefrontal cortex quiets down and shuts down. So why does time pass so strangely? Time's calculated all over your prefrontal cortex. So parts of it wink out. You can't perform that calculation. You're dropped into a timeless, eternal now state, right? The yogis, I'm sure, had a great term that I don't know. The sense of self calculated all over the prefrontal cortex. Your self is actually a network. Nodes of it wink out. Can't perform that calculation. So activity in the prefrontal cortex gets very quiet, takes away your sense of self, takes away your sense of time. Brain waves drop from beta down towards alpha and sometimes down towards slower theta, which is what shows up right on the edge of REM sleep in the hypnagogic state. And then neurochemically, stress hormones are flushed out of your system and you're replaced with feel-good performance-enhancing drugs like serotonin, norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, anandamide, endorphins, and oxytocin, right? These are really heavy performance-enhancing chemicals. They do lots of things. They surround the brain's information processing machinery. So we take in more data per second. We process it more completely, process it more quickly, which is, by the way, why these states are so information rich. All of the brain's information software has been jacked up by this neurochemistry.
When I love this, the conversation specifically around the prefrontal cortex and kind of how it relates to these states, because when you look at yoga, what often we're looking to do, even in physical asana and postures, as well as you look at the samurai that were Zen Buddhists and they talk about mushin and no-mindedness. It's not a docile state. It's not a mindless state in the sense of there's no activity going on, but that normal, chatty, conversational, criticizing, judging, thinking about everything that you're doing is shut off. And whether you're an athlete or a yogi or an artist, that's the optimal state to be in those moments. So you're not second guessing everything that you're doing, which obviously really impedes performance significantly. And so many of these states are working towards that. Now, there's something that I've heard you say, and it's something I hear. If I had a nickel for every time I heard this in yoga teacher trainings that I've led, or just in the yoga community in general, or spiritual communities in general, this idea, this old fallacy that, well, we're only using 10% of our brain, and if we could use more of it, then we'd be in these amazing states of consciousness and all this sort of stuff. Talk to us about that a little bit, and how in the reality, when we're in these optimal states, we're actually not using more of our brain, but less of our brain. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. So this is exactly what you were talking about with the quieting of the prefrontal cortex, right? The old idea about ultimate performance, about these high performance states. And, first of all, let's just start at the beginning and say that yoga, all of the goals are to get the prefrontal cortex to quiet down, right? Physical asanas, which I love, are about exhausting the brain. Why does that work? It's called exercise-induced transient hypofrontality. It means I've tired out my prefrontal cortex. So I've got transient, temporary, hypo, opposite of hyper means to slow down, frontality, the prefrontal cortex. I'm so tired, my brain has decided to stop thinking. Or what happens when you do yoga for 20 minutes and it gets really quiet. And before those 20 minutes happen, you can't hold a handstand. And afterwards, you're rigid straight because the self's out of the way and the motor cortex is fired up, right? That's what we're trying to do here. And the same thing happens. Meditation is just one way to do it, right? Like, box breathing, which is the style of meditation or mindfulness that we like, it's what they used with the Navy SEALs, is almost Kabbalistic. The Kabbalistic Jews would shut off the cortex by overloading it, right? You would be visualizing 8-sided dies morphing into Hebrew letters, morphing into blah, blah, blah. Box breathing is just like a breathing version of that. It gives your brain enough stuff to do that you can lose yourself in the now prefrontal cortex and quiet down, right? So that's one of the things we're all chasing. And what I would argue, and the yogis would argue, is you want that stuff to quiet down, because when the self goes away, when time goes away, when all that anxiety drops out of the equation because our fears reside either in ourselves or in the past or the future, right? When all that goes away, you get very clear and you get a lot of insight. You also, when you come back to reality, have a little space from your emotions, right? You're not quite as reactive. You can get into that gap that shows up between feeling and being. Because once that emotion gets a hold of you, you're on for the ride, right? But you can actually step in and say, no, I'm not going to feel that right now. I don't have to, right? Thus the advantages.
And you guys have a very helpful acronym for that as well, correct? With STIR?
Yeah, it was really a quest trying to figure out, okay, what do all these states have in common? Because even William James, who was the first person I know of who tried to try to say what these things had in common, even he sort of mixed things up. And the reason is usually like the content ends up in the sauce. So like Buddhists describe these experiences through a Buddhist white light lens, but it doesn't always track. The white light lens doesn't make any sense to people who are going into the experience through DMT and has fractal reality in 360 degrees, right? Like those don't track. They're not the same thing. So the terminology that surrounds them, difficult. We wanted to get right down to the phenomenology. How do these states make us feel? And can we explain those core feelings via neurobiology? And what we've come up with is selflessness, the S in STIR, timelessness, the T in STIR. The E is for effortlessness. And this shows up in two different ways. In flow, in yoga, in those kinds of states, it's effortless effort, right? It's you're performing at the utmost of your abilities, you're pushed out to the max, but it's happening automatically. It's where the term flow comes from. Every idea, every action, every decision flows seamlessly, perfectly, effortlessly into the next one, right? So the effortlessness is a phenomenological description of the state. Or if you happen to be in a psychedelic state, it's you go A to B guaranteed, right? That's what Terence McKenna said. Like the advantage of meditation is that you can spend 20 years and maybe nothing happens. The advantage of psychedelics is you take the drug and boom, you are guaranteed someplace else. And the last one we've talked about, it's R, it stands for richness, which is short for information richness, which is the idea that essentially what these states are, right? What this bandwidth, these non-ordinary states of consciousness, the ecstatic bandwidth is how I think about it, or the experiences that are north of happy. They're an information technology, right? They expand our access to information. In this particular case, they access more of the present. We take in more data per second. And they access more of the brain so we can find matches with that data. Now, to return to your first question, what's funny about this is the old idea that this happened was we only use 10% of our brain. So to access flow must be the full brain on overdrive. And it turns out, right, this is exactly backwards. What is happening as we're moving into this stuff is we're dialing back the brain. STIR is the byproduct of less activity in the brain, not more.
One of the ideas that I'm fascinated as well in your work is the contrast between practice and insight. And I think when it comes to musicians, for example, where to get into these ecstatic states when you mentioned jazz musicians in the pocket, it requires a certain level of practice and repetition until they can completely improvise and let go. But in the context, let's say, of more greater life realizations, and we can use this context of yoga, where there's one approach that says just keep doing the same practice or similar practice every single day, 20 years, 30 years, and then you'll get what it is that you need to get. You don't need to do all this fancy stuff, just do this simple thing. And then there's other sides of it that say, try to find these ecstatic experiences that will lead to insights, and those will have really dramatic shifts on your consciousness in day to day. And sometimes those sides war with one another and say, wow, well, those techniques are just crazy. They're not really going to give you any lasting benefit because it's just some temporary thing. You do the thing for 20 years, that's where the real work is. And the other side is like, well, you could waste 20 years of your life and not get anywhere, but with this, you could actually experience something.
Look, this is a right-hand path versus left-hand path discussion, right? That's what you're asking. with the right hand path being the historical rule of law, do what you're told, no questions asked. And left hand paths are questions everywhere, conduct the experiment, everything gray, right? And we've couched it 1,000 different ways. As a general rule, left-hand paths tend to blow up more people than they enlighten, and right-hand paths tend to bore more people than they enlighten, right? Neither are particularly ideal for growth and progress. All we're really saying right now is because of the neurobiology, because we can, for the first time in history, peer under the hood, figure out where it's coming from, what the mechanism is. We can strip out the superstition. We can strip out the gatekeepers, which is huge, right? How many charlatans have led us down like wonky paths, right? Or, become egomaniacs along the way. And what started out as a spiritual path becomes a cult, right? This stuff goes wrong all the time. So we can bypass the gatekeepers. We can bypass the superstition. We can go right to the technology. What works? And how do I integrate both? Because look, chop wood, carry water is what gets you through the struggle phase of flow. You mentioned earlier that flow requires a certain level of expertise. You have to do, right? Prefrontal cortex turns off in flow only because you chunked and automatized a ton of skills. Now, the flow approach says you can play your way into this expert level automation. The chop wood, carry water just says you grind your way in. And what I gotta believe is true, what the research shows is that everybody's path is totally different, right? Bruce Sterling says, follow your weird. Josh Waitzkin, who I respect deeply, says, follow your funk. I don't think there's any individual path to greatness at all. I very much am, I'm a William Jamesian, and, everybody's experience is their own experience. And that's, I think each of us is basically a perspective. And, that's how I approach these things. But what I think is that integrated, the peak experiences allow you to see farther. The chop wood, carry water attitude allows you to come back to earth and do all the hard work to get back to what used to be only possible in a peak experience. And let me really explain that, because I think it's really fundamentally important, because people miss what peak experiences are for. Often you see this in the yoga community a lot. People start feeling this stuff and they think that's life. That's how life should feel. Oh my God, it's the truth. And they become bliss junkies. Yeah. They fuck their lives up, right? All right and left. It's also why I won't use the term yogi, and the quickest way to get me to walk out of your class is for some 22-year-old to try to tell me how to live my life, because you're fucking 22, and I'm sorry, you haven't been kicked around enough to tell me how to live my life. I'm not that arrogant, but really I'm smart enough to go, not so much in a lot of occasions. So I want a middle path between that ecstatic goofiness that shows up on left-hand paths and bliss junkies and the severity of the right-hand path, because the right-hand path stuff works. You have to know how to be good at grit. You have to be gritty to do this stuff. The more peak experiences you have, the more emotional responsibility, emotional control you need. Otherwise, you're just going to get your ass kicked and get, bounced right back around the board.
So in your all your research and essentially reverse engineering these states, so you can peel away all the kind of mysterious mumbo jumbo around it. What have you found for the average person? The typical American working the 9 to 5. How can this information be utilized in their life? Because you work a lot with Fortune 500 companies and executives, top athletes, but for the average person,
it's a great question. And what we talk about it in the book as transitioning from OS to UI. And what we mean by that is right now we treat our psychology, that inner critic, the voice in our head, our thinking, our talking, as the operating system of our brain. It's everything. It runs the entire show. By turning it into a user interface, right? It's just like an icon on your dashboard. You can click into that rational, logical, hypercritical voice when you need it, but there are other options available. And so we were talking earlier about kind of the benefits of, if you're facing a problem, change your state of consciousness. Don't try to think your way through the problem. Try to do some yoga. Shift your state of consciousness. I Can we swear on your podcast?
You can. We'll probably bleep them out, but it's okay.
So, so one of the bits of I don't ever give relationship. I don't give advice. I'm not interested in advice. I'm interested in how does this work and what's the experiment to run. Try this yourself. So one of the things that's very useful in relationships is this OS to UI transition. If you get into a fight, use physical contact, shall we say, first before you try to solve the fight. Have sex. Use the neurochemistry of sex, which will put you into an ecstatic state and shut off the self and do all this stuff first to bring yourselves together, then try to solve the problem. Shift state first, problem second. Very simple kind of way. And you see this, by the way, Arnold Schwarzenegger, when he was governor, used to start every meeting he ran with kind of like a 3-minute meditation, basically. Shifted everybody's state, brought everybody together. So like the simplest application is to take state change and use it as a way to approach certain kinds of problems.
Where does technology and advances in pharmacology fit into this? Because that's another area where I'm very fascinated in. There's a lot of resistance often within kind of the yoga communities around some of this stuff, but there are definitely pockets where they're very open to it. But I love how the capacity not to overtake the rest of the work, but to enhance our time with the work. So where do those things start to fit in this overall conversation of ecstasis?
So we started to ask ourselves after we started to see kind of ecstatic techniques being deployed, not just kind of at the high ends of business, they were there in spades there, but they were also 44% of American companies are going to roll out mindfulness stress-based reduction programs for their employees this year. Yoga is a $28 billion industry, right? It's high times on Main Street. Marijuana is illegal in almost half the states, right? Like we are in the middle of a big cultural shift around these ideas. In fact, February GQ, cover of GQ, why your boss thinks you should be taking LSD at work, right? I mean, like on the headline, on the cover, this stuff is very new. Now, that was the first question. Why now? And the answer to that question was, hey, there are 4 emerging forces right now: psychology, neurobiology, technology, and pharmacology, right? You mentioned 2 of them. All 4 of these things are starting to accelerate exponentially, and they unlock a whole lot of stuff. Psychology, our version of who we are in the world and what is permissible for us as individuals, as tribes, as cultures, and whatever, greatly expanding, right? We can now be a lot more things. We've got 70 different types of sexual pronouns that apply to people. One example, right? This has given us way more permission to explore other aspects of our being and our consciousness. Super interesting, super useful. Psychology is also becoming a big data science. So if you have squishy subjective stuff like altered states of consciousness, one way to get at them is to ask 100,000 people to describe the experience. And suddenly that's a big data set and you can get a little more rigorous. Neurobiology allows us to map and measure the inexplicable for in our bodies for the very first time. So maps of new territories. Pharmacology gives us access to these states nearly on demand and with increasing precision. And technology brings that access to scale. So what used to be 5 people around a campfire becomes 70,000 at Burning Man, and they're all experiencing the same kind of state shift. So that's why this stuff is happening now. Now, to go back to your original question, this is something else we talk about. You brought up what is colloquially referred to as the skin bag bias, right? It is the idea that a path to, shall we say, wisdom, yoga, for example, the world's wisdom traditions. In those traditions, generally, stuff we suffer for is better. When it's internal, inside the skin bag, it is authentic, pure, and good. And when we get there externally using a technology or using pharmacology, a pill, it's a little bit gray. You know what I mean? Like you're kind of cool with somebody who has a vision of God after a yoga class, but you're a little nervous when they put on the God helmet, they zap the right temporal lobe and they have that same vision of God. Which one is true and pure? Who gets to found a religion and who's just full of shit, right? Like those become really difficult questions all of a sudden. Those are the questions that are coming up right now. And there's certainly resistance in some of the older traditions for this stuff. And the classic example in science is the Good Friday experiment, which was one of the very first LSD experiments, or psilocybin mushrooms. And it was done at Harvard. And they gave a bunch of divinity students mushrooms, and they gave the other half of the group placebo, and they sent them into the Easter Sunday service or the Good Friday service. And they came back out and they said, who had a mystical experience? And everybody who had mushrooms had this huge mystical experience, and some of the other group, not so much. And in fact, so powerful was this that everybody in the I took psilocybin group goes on to become a priest, and none of the other people do. So that's how powerful this is as far as a religious experience goes. But we don't believe them. This is 1964 and nobody believes them because it's a drug and it can't be an authentic mystical experience. So they redo this experiment twice more. Finally, Roland Griffiths, John Hopkins, 8 years ago with full double-blind modern standards. And once again, they prove what we learned back in the 60s and what Huxley told us back in the 40s. And, ad infinitum, what William James told us in 1902 and Benjamin Blood told us before him, right? This is not new information, but there's a lot of resistance to it. And especially Protestant work ethic America, right? We want to earn our liberation, right? We are suspicious of liberation in a pill that is maybe not so clean. Maybe we don't trust what we get, when we're on an ayahuasca. Well, we don't tend to trust certain drugs anymore. Now ayahuasca seems to be the drug that imparts truth, and it's all over, America. But LSD or MDMA is what kids do at parties, and so not much truth left there, right? That's interesting.
Personally, I view you as really a leader in this modern revolution of consciousness that's happening. I really feel that there is a shift in large part because of many of the factors that you mentioned of this kind of pinnacle that we're coming to in these different fields. Where do you see this going now? Or perhaps we could even say, where would you like to see this go from here?
Well, what the research consistently shows is that you have to be able to put language around things before they become real. So people don't know this, but empathy doesn't exist in the world until the mid-1800s, when a German psychologist, Wilhelm Wundt, is trying to come up with kind of the way that objects can impart feelings. And another guy, Lipp in Munich, is trying to figure out why is it that art moves me? And why is it that sometimes I look at a work of art and I don't just get an emotion, I actually get that shared feeling of aha insight. I got what the artist had the moment. Right? It's what Rothko said when he said, people who look at my paintings and weep are having the same religious experience I had while painting it, right? And we don't have a term for this. So they come up with empathy. This, they borrowed a German loan word, gets translated in English, it becomes empathy. And suddenly people can start feeling empathy. Now, so sometimes it's the language that shifts. Sometimes all this stuff goes underground. Scientists don't believe consciousness is real, really, as a field for study until the turn of the 21st, right? Because Crick and a handful of other people, Christoph Koch and some really smart people, finally taking kind of a neurobiological approach to consciousness. So suddenly we have language around these experiences, and we have science to underpin enough of the squishy stuff that these things become real. My point is, we are just now getting a language to have these discussions, right? The research shows that we get more empathy. We get wider perspective. We can hold, the more experiences of ecstasis we have, the more we can integrate it into the day-to-day. So you got to do both. It's got to be a middle path. The more, and you pointed this out earlier, I just want to come back to it because the research does show that you're exactly right. The more you can combine therapies. So people who have a meditation practice go far. People who have a meditation practice and add in a surfing practice with it, which produces lots of flow, they go farther. People who add in an occasional MDMA experience go even further. People who take 6 months off from all that stuff to integrate this stuff into their daily lives and do the homework go even further, right? So we do see the integration. We do see the middle path. You can't go the route of the bliss junkie because you can't, when you're in these peak states, that you don't just get shown the vision of the future. This is where I can go next. You also get shown what's wrong with you. Hey man, you're being a egotistical narcissist in this aspect of your marriage. Fix that. And if you don't fix it, your marriage will explode. That's what you get to see. You get to see a little bit farther, a little into the future, and you're shown exactly what to do next. It's still pure flow, but you get kicked out. You drop back to earth. You got to do the hard work in between. So my way of saying, I think we're getting a language around this. I think we're all starting to run the better experiments. I think we're going to get to a bigger, more expansive language that's going to allow us to ask the next set of questions. That's what I'm interested in. The next set of questions. More than anything else, that's where I want to help people get to.
And what do you think will be the next big question?
Well, Mike Gervais, high performance psychologist I respect a great deal, worked with the Seattle Seahawks, a good friend of mine, thinks that we're going to be able to start to understand what thoughts are, where they come from, what do they weigh, how they're generated, what exactly are they, right? We now know that thoughts are sort of clusters of neurons, which is new. Like a thought is a network. So that's a new idea. I think that's getting interesting, right? That stuff is starting to get interesting. One of the places I look at is the very first so-called mystical experience to be decoded neurobiologically was Andy Newberg decoding the experience of cosmic unity. I feel one with everything. That is the perennial philosophy. Shows up everywhere in every religion and every mystical tradition on earth. And he figured out, what creates this in the brain and the body? How do we feel this? And that was 1997. I talked to Andy for the first time in 2000, and we realized that his research seemed to map onto my flow research with action sport athletes. We started to realize that what he was looking at in Tibetan Buddhists was the same thing I was looking at certain surfers who became the wave, right? The Tibetan Buddhist becoming one with everything mapped onto the surfer becoming one with the wave in the flow state. It was the first time I went, hey, wait a minute, mystical experiences, flow experiences, maybe they're the same thing. That's my book, West of Jesus, it's my second book. And that conversation, I remember saying to him, this is really cool. This is really cutting edge. How far do you think we're going to get on this stuff in our lifetime? And he said, I don't know. I don't think we're going to get very far, maybe a couple more steps into the rabbit hole, right? It's 20 years later, and my friend Shahar Arzi had just mapped the doppelganger effect. Now, if cosmic unity is the mystical experience that is everywhere in every religion, the doppelganger effect has got to be the rarest one in history. It shows up in Kabbalistic Judaism, one 13th century mystic who says if you do this chant, this meditation, these body motions, you're going to have a vision of your double, and you can ask your double questions about the future and get truthful answers. And he figures out where it comes from in the brain, builds a VR simulation so anybody can experience it. Along the way, every single other mystical experience you can think of or name has pretty much been decoded. We know where it comes from. A lot of them we can reproduce now with technology, some with pharmacology. This puts a very interesting, up till now, religions are essentially, this is politics, this is tradition, this is good for you, this is some gobbledygook that we don't know where it came from, but it's in there, so we gotta, right? And the way forward, the path to whatever it is that you're looking for is like hidden. There's 100 instructions to produce a given state. Even if you go back to the doppelganger thing, if you go to the original instructions to produce this thing, there's like 150 things to do. 5 of them actually impact brain function and produce the experience. We now know that. So we can use VR to produce it for you, right? So when they were talking to the doppelganger and getting accurate predictions about the future, they were just in flow. Self was turned off, fears out of the picture. You're seeing a little farther, a little more information. Doesn't take much, right? So that's all that's going on. There's nothing, it's not mystical, it's an information technology, and now we know what levers to pull in the brain to produce it. So what happens now with religion is they have to earn it. We know how it works now. We know what we're getting access to. There are really interesting questions about where does the information come from and no clear answers, right? I will tell you it comes from the adaptive unconscious, taking data that's being processed through the pattern, right? Blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people are going to agree with Carl Jung and say, hey, man, there's a collective unconscious out there, and that's what we're tapping into. And you've got all kinds of people on all sides of this argument saying all kinds of quantum physics, magic, fairy dust, gobbledygook, The Secret, trying to explain one question: where does the information come from? And all I want to do is just take it one step farther, right? Like that's the next question I want to get. I love that question. Where does the information come from? I want to know what the next set of answers is.
So Stephen, Honestly, I could talk with you the rest of the day about all this stuff. I'm really enjoying our chat, but I know that we do have a time frame today for our conversation. I want to respect that. So where can people find out more about your work, get your book? I know that you guys have a special website set up for the book itself, but you also have the Flow Genome Project. What's the best way to connect with you and all the various projects that you have going on?
For sure. StealingFireBook.com is where you'll get everything about Stealing Fire, including links to buy the book and reviews and everything else you might want. If you would like to know more about flow hacking, flowgenomeproject.com, you will find a free flow profile on the main page. So it's a tratology. It says if you're this kind of person, you'll find flow in these directions. So it's a good place to start if you're hunting for more flow in your life. And if you want to take that one step farther, StephenKotler.com, StephenKotler.com is my website. And if you sign up for my email newsletter, we will give you a PDF breakdown of 17 flow triggers and how to deploy those in your life. So 3 different places to start depending on, your interest and how deep you want to go.
Awesome. And we'll of course include those in the show description and show notes as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. I know you got a pretty crazy busy schedule going on. So thanks for taking the time and speaking with us today. For all of our listeners out there, I hope you've learned something new. I hope you're as excited about all of this as I am and go out and get Stealing Fire, Stephen and Jamie's new book. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you all have a very present moment. Namaste.
Hey everybody, it's Ashton here with an announcement. We're starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter into the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, we'd really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes, left us a review, leave us some comments, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might enjoy it. Also want to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog and also the name of a Facebook group where I interact with guests and our audience. We'll post recent episodes up there as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and or the topics on the shows. And again, thank you so much for listening. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode. And thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.